This is a compilation of over 1 hour of Elder Scrolls Dragonborn lore explained, so sit back, relax, and grab your popcorn. Let's kick things off with every Dragonborn in Elder Scrolls History Explained. The Dragonborn are some of the most powerful beings in Elder Scrolls history. Blessed by Akatosh with the blood and soul of a dragon, they were meant to protect humanity from forces no ordinary mortal could face. But not every Dragonborn answered that call. Some became legends, others became monsters, and the very first one, he became both. Let's start at the beginning, with the one who ruined everything, Miraak. Before there was a Dovahkiin saving the world in Skyrim, there was Miraak, and he wanted absolutely nothing to do with saving anyone. The first Dragonborn lived during the Merethic era, back when dragons ruled over humanity and dragon priests served as their enforcers. Miraak was one of those priests. Loyal, powerful, obedient. For a while, anyway. Here's where it gets complicated. At some point during his service, Miraak got his hands on a black book, one of Hermaeus Mora's lovely little doorways into Apocrypha. And Mora, being the tentacled knowledge hoarder that he is, saw an opportunity. He taught Miraak the Bend Will Shout, a thuum so powerful it could force dragons themselves into submission, not kill them, literally bend their will to his command, and Miraak did not use this gift politely. He turned on his dragon masters and started devouring their souls. If you visit his temple on Solstheim, you'll find dragon skeletons scattered along the pathway like some kind of horrific lawn decoration. The man was eating dragons the way you and I eat lunch, just casually, on a Tuesday. But here's the kicker. When the Dragon War broke out and ancient Nord heroes came begging for his help against Alduin, the literal world eater, Miraak said no. The one being on the planet specifically designed to protect humanity from dragons, looked at the greatest dragon threat in history and said, "Not my problem," which is, not ideal. His fellow dragon priest Valak eventually challenged him, and the battle was so catastrophic it literally tore Solstheim away from the Skyrim mainland. An entire island ripped from a continent because two guys couldn't settle their differences. But before Valak could finish him off, Hermaeus Mora yanked Miraak into Apocrypha, trapping him in a realm of infinite knowledge and zero freedom. And that's the irony that makes Miraak tragic. He rejected his divine burden completely, choosing personal dominion over service. He traded the dragons for a Daedric prince, and spent thousands of years as a prisoner, not emerging until 4E201. The first Dragonborn ended up more enslaved than anyone he could have liberated. Every gift Akatosh could give, squandered for power he never got to use. But if Miraak represents what happens when a Dragonborn rejects their calling, the next one shows what happens when they embrace it completely. Saint Alessia. Miraak had the blood of a dragon and used it to serve himself. Alessia had the blood of a dragon and used it to free everyone else. And the way she got it is one of the most metal things in all of Elder Scrolls lore. See, Alessia wasn't born Dragonborn. She didn't inherit it. Akatosh, the dragon god of time, literally drew blood from his own divine heart and gave it to her, not as a reward, but as a contract. Covenant. As long as Alessia's bloodline maintained the dragon fires and kept up worship of Akatosh, the gates of oblivion would stay sealed. No Daedric invasions. No hellscape portals opening up in the middle of your Tuesday afternoon. The literal safety of the entire mortal world bound to one woman's bloodline, which is, a bit of pressure. But here's the thing. Alessia didn't just accept this divine burden and sit around looking holy. In 1E242, she launched the Alessian slave rebellion against the Aelids, the Heartland High Elves, who had been enslaving humans for centuries. And these weren't your standard oppressors. The Aelids actively worshipped Daedric forces, using Daedra and undead to keep their human slaves in line. Alessia looked at all of that and said no. By 1E243, her forces had captured the White Gold Tower itself, and she declared herself the first Empress of Cyrodiil, former slave to Empress in roughly a year. Not bad, but conquering was only half the job. Alessia's empire was a patchwork of different peoples with different gods. The Nords worshipped one pantheon, the Elves followed another, and if she picked a side, the whole thing falls apart before the mortar dries. So she synthesized the Nordic and Aldmeri pantheons into a single unified religion, the 8 Divines, one framework that gave everyone something familiar to hold on to and prevented the kind of religious civil war that would have torn her empire apart in a generation. That's not just military leadership, that's political genius. And then there's her death. On her deathbed, Akatosh himself appeared and bound her soul directly into the Amulet of Kings. Alessia became the first human saint, and the amulet became the physical anchor of the covenant she'd established. For thousands of years after, every emperor who wore it was essentially carrying Alessia's soul around their neck, maintaining the barrier between Tamriel and oblivion through her sacrifice. She didn't just fulfill her divine burden, she became the mechanism. Her soul literally powers the protection of the entire entire world. Every Dragonborn that came after her is measured against what she built, but the next one on our list took that template and turned it into something completely different. Because Riemann Cyrodiil didn't receive his Dragonborn status from a god. He received it from an invading army. Riemann Cyrodiil. Every Dragonborn we've talked about so far got their confirmation from a god, or discovered it through rebellion. Riemann Cyrodiil got his from an invading army that crossed an entire ocean just to find him. And that's not even the weirdest part. In 1E 2700, the Tsaishi warriors of Akavir launched a full-scale invasion of Tamriel. This wasn't a raiding party. This was a coordinated military campaign from a continent most people in Tamriel had barely heard of. And for 3 years, they carved through everything in their path. Cyrodiil was fractured, disorganized, and completely unprepared. The Colovians and Nibbanese couldn't agree on lunch, let alone a unified defense. So naturally, the Akaviri were winning. Enter Raymond, a military leader who somehow unified the fractured armies into a single fighting force capable of actually defending the continent, which is, kind of important when snake warriors from another landmass are knocking on your door, but here's where it gets genuinely strange. At the Battle of Pale Pass in 1E 2703, the Akaviri armies heard Raymond's voice carry across the battlefield, and instead of fighting harder, they dropped to their knees, every single one of them. They surrendered on the spot and declared him Dragonborn, the chosen one they had actually been searching for this entire time. They didn't invade Tamriel to conquer it. They invaded Tamriel to find him. The entire war was essentially a very aggressive job interview, and Raymond passed. Alessia got her confirmation directly from Akatosh. Mirak figured it out through forbidden knowledge and Diedrich Pax. Raymond had a foreign military force sail across an ocean, fight a 3-year war, and then kneel because they recognized something divine in his voice. That's not how you normally discover you're chosen, but here we are. What followed was even more impressive. Rather than executing the surrendered Akaviri, Riemann incorporated them into his forces. These former invaders became his elite military backbone, and with this expanded army, Riemann went on a conquest spree that would make most emperors weep. He founded the Second Empire and annexed High Rock, Skyrim, Valenwood, and the Somerset Isles. Nearly all of Tamriel fell under his banner. The only holdout was Morrowind, because Morrowind has always been difficult about everything. The Raymond dynasty lasted roughly 200 years, with his heirs maintaining Alessia's covenant with Akatosh. The dragonfires stayed lit. The barrier held. Raymond had taken what Alessia built and stretched it across an entire continent. And then there's the title. Raymond wasn't just called emperor. He was called the worldly god, not a saint like Alessia, a god, a man who spoke on a battlefield and made an entire invasion force surrender through sheer divine nature, then built an empire so vast, people literally worshipped him for it. Where Alessia forged the lock, Raymond built a bigger door. But if Raymond's story sounds like the peak of what a Dragonborn can achieve, wait until you hear about the one who took it even further and became an actual god in the pantheon. Tiber Septim. Every Dragonborn before him built something. Tiber Septim built everything, and then he became a god for doing it. Born Hjalti Earlybeard, this man clawed his way from a general serving under King Kulakain of Falkreath to the single most powerful ruler Tamriel has ever seen. He was trained in the Thuum by the Greybeards themselves, and when the Nordic armies heard him use the voice, they joined him on the spot. From that moment forward, Tiber Septim did not stop conquering until there was literally nothing left to conquer. Here's the thing. Every other Dragonborn had limits. Alessia freed humanity but ruled one region. Riemann built an empire but never got Morrowind. Tiber Septim looked at the entire continent and said all of it. Through military conquest, political maneuvering, and a level of personal ambition that makes every other emperor look like they were playing on casual difficulty, he systematically dismantled every independent kingdom standing between him and total unification. But even Tiber Septim hit a wall. The Somerset Isles, home of the Altmer, magically advanced, geographically isolated, and historically unconquerable. Every previous empire had simply accepted that the High Elves were off the table, so he activated the Numidium. The Numidium was an ancient Dwemer construct of absolutely incomprehensible destructive power. Think of it as the nuclear option of Elder Scrolls lore, except nuclear weapons don't also break the fabric of reality when you set them off. Tiber Septim pointed it directly at the Somerset Isles without a second of hesitation. Actually, yeah, let's go take the Elf Island too, which is, not ideal for the elves. By 2E 896, Tiber Septim had accomplished what zero Dragonborn before him ever managed: the complete unification of every known territory on Tamriel under a single imperial banner. Every province, every kingdom, every stubborn holdout. This ended the interregnum and kicked off the Third Era, a period of relative peace and stability that lasted over 400 years. The man conquered an entire continent, and the result was the longest stretch of peace in recorded history. His methods were brutal and often ruthless, but the outcome speaks for itself. And then he died in 3E38, and that's where the story gets truly insane. After his death, Tiber Septim underwent apotheosis. He didn't just get remembered fondly. He didn't get a statue or a holiday. He became a god. Talos, the ninth divine, added to the pantheon alongside the original 8. He is the only Dragonborn in history to transcend mortality entirely and join the gods as a peer. Alessia became a saint. Raymond became a legend. Tiber Septim became divine. That's not a metaphor. He literally ascended to godhood. His divine burden was conquest and total unification, and he fulfilled it so completely that the universe itself promoted him. Every Dragonborn before him carried a piece of Akatosh's purpose. Tiber Septim carried the whole thing, and then asked for more. But if you think being descended from a literal god would keep his bloodline on the straight and narrow, you clearly haven't met the Wolf Queen, Patima Septim. Most Dragonborn on this list had a divine burden and either rose to meet it or ran from it. Patima Septim looked at hers, laughed, and set it on fire. Born in 3E67 to Emperor Pelagius Septim II, Patima entered the world with dynasty, dragon blood, and every advantage the Septim name could offer. Her grandfather took one look at her as a newborn and declared she appeared as a she-wolf ready to pounce, which is, not the most comforting thing to say about a baby. But the old man wasn't wrong. He was off by exactly 0%, because Patima didn't just grow up ambitious. She grew up to be one of the most destructive forces the Third Empire ever produced. In 3E121, a succession crisis erupted, and Patima saw her opening. Rather than accept her place in the imperial hierarchy, she rallied armies from Skyrim, High Rock, and Northern Morrowind, and personally led forces into battle. The result was the War of the Red Diamond, a 16-year succession conflict that turned the empire into a graveyard. And I don't mean that metaphorically. Entire regions were depopulated, trade routes collapsed, farmland burned, civilians starved in provinces that hadn't seen a soldier in months. Most of the imperial family was murdered during the fighting, which is impressive in the worst possible way. Patima didn't just want the ruby throne, she wanted everyone between her and it to stop breathing. But here's where it gets genuinely dark. As the war turned against her, Patima didn't surrender. She pivoted to necromancy. And not amateur raise a skeleton or two necromancy. Patima became one of the most accomplished necromancers in Skyrim's entire history, raising full armies of undead to replace her dwindling living forces. Some accounts suggest she pursued Daedric pacts to sustain her campaign, reaching out to powers that would have made Alessia weep. Her divine burden was stewardship, protection. She chose to raise the dead and bargain with darkness instead. She died during the Siege of Solitude in 3E137 at the age of 70, cornered in the very city she'd ruled. 70 years old and still fighting, still refusing to let go of a throne she never actually claimed. You almost have to respect the commitment. Almost. But even death might not have been the end of it. Before she died, Patima passed a sinister wolf-shaped pendant to her nephew Pelagius. That nephew went on to become Pelagius III, better known as the Mad Emperor, a ruler so mentally unstable his reign became one of the most infamous disasters in Septim history. Scholars have long debated whether that pendant carried some form of curse, a final act of spite from a woman who couldn't win the throne but could still poison the bloodline that kept it from her. Patima had everything: the blood, the name, the ability. She could have been a stabilizing force for the empire. Instead, she chose to burn it all for a crown she never wore, and historians classify her as unambiguously evil. No asterisks. No, well, from her perspective, just evil. But if Patima represents what happens when a Dragonborn chooses destruction from within the bloodline, wait until you hear about someone who may have stolen the blood itself: Mankar Camoran. Mankar Camoran is either the most dangerous Dragonborn who ever lived, or the greatest fraud in Elder Scrolls history, and nobody, not the lore community, not Bethesda, not the in-game texts, has ever given us a definitive answer, which makes him the single most unsettling name on this entire list. Here's what we know for sure. Mankar Camoran was the illegitimate son of Camoran the Usurper and his Bosmer mistress Kalis. He was an Altmer who founded the Order of the Mythic Dawn, a Daedric cult dedicated to Mehrunes Dagon, the Prince of Destruction, and in 3E433, he orchestrated the assassination of Emperor Uriel Septim VII and every known Septim heir, triggering the Oblivion Crisis and Mehrunes Dagon's full-scale invasion of Tamriel. That's the single most destructive act any alleged Dragonborn ever committed. Not Mirak's rebellion, not Patima's civil war. Camoran literally opened the door for a Daedric prince to walk into the Imperial City. But here's where it gets complicated. The strongest strongest evidence that Mankar Cameron was a real Dragonborn? He wore the Amulet of Kings. That's not a piece of jewelry you just throw on. The amulet has absolute restrictions. It slips from the neck of any wearer who doesn't have dragon blood. Every historical account agrees on this. The thing is basically a divine lie detector for Dragonborn status, and Cameron passed the test. Then there's his own writing. In the first book of his Mythic Dawn commentaries, Cameron claims that after speaking with another tongue, he could speak fire within 3 nights. 3 nights. Normal mortals train with the Greybeards for years, sometimes decades, to master a single shout. Mastering fire breath in 3 days is described as flatly impossible unless the person already had inherent Dragonborn capabilities, unless the power was already inside him, waiting to be unlocked. So, here's the question that has kept the lore community arguing for nearly 20 years. Was he real, or was he a fake? And here's the terrifying part. Both answers are bad. If Mankar Cameron was a genuine Dragonborn, that means Akatosh's gift, the same divine blood given to Alessia to protect humanity, can be wielded by someone who wants to burn it all down. It means the Covenant isn't a safeguard. It's just power, and power doesn't care who uses it. A Dragonborn can serve a Daedric prince, murder an emperor, and rip open the gates of oblivion while wearing the very amulet designed to keep those gates shut. If he was a fraud, that's arguably worse, because it means Daedric princes can manufacture fake Dragonborn. It means Mehrunes Dagon found a way to bypass Akatosh's most sacred restriction, fooling the Amulet of Kings itself. And if one Daedric prince can do it, what's stopping the others? Either way, the foundation cracks. Nobody talks about this enough. Cameron didn't just kill an emperor. He broke the question of what Dragonborn even means. Every other name on this list, you can point to their blood, their lineage, their divine moment. With Cameron, you get a question mark. And that question mark brought Tamriel closer to annihilation than any dragon, any war, any necromancer queen ever did. Speaking of the emperor he murdered, let's talk about the man who saw it coming and couldn't stop it, Uriel Septim. 7. Uriel Septim VII ruled Tamriel for 65 years. 65 years on the Ruby Throne, from 3E 368 until his assassination in 3E 433. He was 87 years old when he died. One of the longest reigns in the entire history of the Empire. And on paper, that sounds like stability. But here's the thing. Uriel's reign wasn't a golden age. It was a slow, quiet collapse dressed up in imperial robes. The first real crack came in 3E 389 when his own imperial battle mage, Jagger Tharn, betrayed him. Tharn used magic to literally imprison the emperor and replace him on the throne. For 10 years, the real Uriel Septim sat in a magical prison while an imposter wore his face and ran his empire into the ground. Provinces drifted. Alliances frayed. The whole structure Tiber Septim had spent a lifetime building started rotting from the inside, and nobody even knew it was happening. It took a figure known as the Eternal Champion to defeat Tharn and restore Uriel to power. And to his credit, Uriel tried. He released the Nerevarine in Morrowind. He worked to reassert imperial authority over territories that had tasted independence during Tharn's usurpation. But the damage was done. 10 years of magical identity theft doesn't exactly patch over easily, and then came the Mythic Dawn. In 3E 433, a Daedric cult dedicated to Mehrunes Dagon assassinated Uriel Septim VII, alongside every single one of his known heirs. Everyone. The entire legitimate Septim bloodline, wiped out in a coordinated strike designed to break the Covenant. Without a Dragonborn emperor to light the dragon fires, the barrier between Tamriel and Oblivion collapsed. Gates tore open across the continent. Daedra poured through. The Oblivion crisis had begun. But there was one heir nobody accounted for. An illegitimate son named Martin Septim, hidden away in a chapel in Kvatch, completely unaware of his bloodline. Martin briefly became the last Septim emperor. Briefly. Because the only way to stop Mehrunes Dagon from physically manifesting in the imperial city was for Martin to shatter the Amulet of Kings and channel the power of Akatosh directly through his own body. He did it. He became the avatar of Akatosh, a golden dragon that drove Dagon back into oblivion. And then Martin was gone. The amulet was destroyed. The dragon fires went dark permanently. Alessia's covenant, the divine agreement that had protected Tamriel across 3 entire eras, was over. The Septim dynasty ended not with a whimper, but with the total destruction of everything that had made it divine. Uriel's burden was preservation, and despite 65 years of trying, the forces against him proved overwhelming. He couldn't stop Tharn, he couldn't rebuild what was lost, and he couldn't protect his own children from a cult that wanted to watch the world world burn. Sometimes the divine burden isn't about what you accomplish. It's about how long you can hold the walls together before they finally come down. But if the septum line ended with Martin's sacrifice, and the amulet of kings was shattered, and the covenant was broken, then who exactly showed up 200 years later with the blood of a dragon and the voice to prove it? The last Dragonborn. Every Dragonborn we've talked about had something behind them. Alessia had a divine covenant and an army of freed slaves. Remen had the Akaviri kneeling at his feet. Tiber Septim had the Numidium and the political machinery of an entire continent. Mirac had forbidden knowledge and a cult of devoted followers. The last Dragonborn had nothing. No army, no dynasty, no empire. Just a prophecy carved into Alduin's wall and a date with the end of the world. In 4E 201, Alduin the World Eater returned, not from some distant realm, but from time itself. The ancient Nord heroes who fought him during the Dragon War couldn't kill him, so they used an Elder Scroll to rip him out of the timeline entirely, punting him forward through the ages like a problem for someone else to deal with. Which is, not ideal for the someone else. That someone else turned out to be an unknown prisoner about to get their head chopped off in Helgen. Alduin's arrival interrupted the execution, and shortly after this, nobody killed the dragon Mirmilnir and absorbed its soul. The Greybeards felt it immediately and shouted Dovahkiin across the land, a summons that echoed from High Hrothgar to every corner of Skyrim. One word. That was the entire job interview. Here's where it gets complicated. To defeat Alduin, the last Dragonborn needed the Dragonrend shout, a technique invented by mortals during the Dragon War, specifically designed to force dragons to comprehend mortality. Dragons are immortal beings. The concept of ending, of not existing, is literally incomprehensible to them. Dragonrend shoves that concept into their minds and it breaks them, temporarily, grounds them, makes them vulnerable, but nobody alive knew the shout. So the last Dragonborn used an Elder Scroll to enter the time wound at the throat of the world and witness the original battle against Alduin firsthand. They learned Dragonrend by literally being present at its creation. Then they came back and used it. Alduin. His name translates to Destroyer, Devour, Master. Some scholars consider him not just a servant of Akatosh, but an alternative manifestation of the dragon god of time himself. The entity that created the flow of time might also be the entity destined to end it. The last Dragonborn's divine burden was to stop that from happening. Not to build an empire, not to claim a throne, just save everything. And that's what makes the last Dragonborn the most important one on this entire list. Every other Dragonborn had institutional support, political power, or at minimum a religious order backing their play. The last Dragonborn had the Greybeards and a really steep mountain to climb. The divine burden here was the purest version of what Akatosh intended when he first blessed a mortal with dragon blood. No politics, no ambition, just protection. The symmetry is almost too clean. Thousands of years earlier, Mirac was given this exact same gift, the first Dragonborn. Blessed by Akatosh, capable of devouring dragon souls, powerful enough to reshape the world. And he refused. He rejected his divine purpose, sold his soul to Hermaeus Mora, and let humanity fend for itself. The last Dragonborn finished what Mirac wouldn't start, an unknown hero with no name, no legacy, and no reason to fight other than the fact that someone had to. Akatosh blessed the first mortal with dragon blood, and that mortal said no. Thousands of years later, he blessed another, and that one said yes. That's the entire story of the Dragonborn. That's the cycle. Completed. In the world of Tamriel, being Dragonborn means carrying the soul of a dragon inside a mortal body. It sounds awesome, until you realize almost everyone who ever had this gift ended up dead, betrayed, or trapped in a tentacle dimension for thousands of years. 8 individuals across thousands of years of history carried this burden, and not a single one of them got a happy ending. Let's start at the very beginning. Mirac. Mirac is the original Dragonborn, the very first mortal to harness the soul of a dragon, but also easily the most tragic. He wasn't just a Dragonborn, he was a priest of the dragon cult during the late Merethic era, the age when dragons ruled Nirn with iron claws and flame. But Mirac wasn't content to serve. Instead, he used the power granted by a mysterious and dangerous black book from Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric prince of forbidden knowledge, to turn that power against his dragon masters. Before you think this is just some heroic rebellion story, hear me out. Mirac's access to Mora's black book gave him more than just just power. He gained entry into Apocrypha, a tentacle-infested realm of endless dark knowledge. There, he learned the Bend Will Shout, a terrifying Thuum technique that lets him dominate dragons themselves. This wasn't just shouting dragons off cliffs. Miraak could command dragons like puppets. His rebellion wasn't subtle. The dragons retaliated mercilessly, raising his temple on Solstheim. Cornered and broken, Miraak fled fully into Apocrypha. But here's where it gets dark. In trading dragon servitude for Daedric servitude, Miraak didn't win freedom. He became a prisoner of Hermaeus Mora. For millennia, he's been trapped in this mind-warping realm, painfully aware of his own fading relevance and powerless to escape. And the worst part? Hermaeus Mora wasn't done with him. When the last Dragonborn arrives centuries later, Mora engineers a fight to pit them against each other, a rigged battle to replace Miraak with a new pawn. After a brutal showdown, Miraak is defeated, only to be impaled and consumed by Mora himself, who coldly declares, "Did you think you could escape me, Miraak?" It's almost too cruel. The very dragon soul power that made Miraak a legend ends with him erased completely by the very force that empowered him. Some argue Miraak's Dragonborn status is unique. Unlike others born with the soul of a dragon, his may have been gifted or transformed through Mora's knowledge and magic, making him a cautionary figure rather than a true inheritor of dragon blood. His story is essentially a prison break that never succeeds, a dark prototype showing what happens when dragon-souled power serves personal ambition unchecked. No empire, no religion, no lasting legacy, just isolation in a Lovecraftian dimension for endless millennia. Miraak's fate is a stark warning that raw power without purpose or balance only leads to oblivion. If you think that's bad, wait until you hear about Saint Alessia, the founder of the Dragonborn legacy and the woman who took that power and forged an empire. Saint Alessia. Saint Alessia is the architect of everything that comes after her. Without her, there's no Amulet of Kings, no dragonfires, no covenant keeping Tamriel safe from the Daedra. She wasn't your typical Dragonborn spitting shouts or slaying dragons. Instead, she used her dragon blood to build a civilization and establish a new order between mortals and gods. Before you dismiss her because she's not swinging around Thuum like Miraak or the last Dragonborn, hear me out. Alessia started as a Nedic slave woman living under the brutal rule of the Aeliid sorcerer kings in Cyrodiil. Around 1E 242, she led the human rebellion that crushed Elven dominion, uniting humans and sympathetic Elven rebels alike. During the darkest days of this fight, Alessia prayed to the Aedra for help. Akatosh answered by forging a divine covenant with her, granting her the Amulet of Kings and the power to light the eternal dragonfires. This wasn't just a fancy heirloom. The amulet and dragonfires together create a metaphysical barrier preventing Daedric princes from fully manifesting on Nirn. The covenant was sealed in the blood of Alessia's line, meaning only those with her dragon-blessed bloodline could wield the amulet and maintain this barrier. She essentially invented the political and spiritual category of Dragonborn. It's not just about raw power, but about maintaining cosmic order and imperial sovereignty. Dragon blood became the legal foundation for rulership in the Empire, something no Dragonborn before her had done. While Alessia doesn't roar or summon dragons, her Dragonborn status literally reshaped the course of Nirn's history. The covenant she established held strong for over 3 millennia, shaping key events like the Oblivion Crisis far down the timeline. And here's the kicker. After her death, Akatosh granted Alessia a saintly apotheosis, turning her soul into a tutelary spirit protecting Cyrodiil and the Imperial line forever. Divine legacy on a scale nobody else touches. She also secured military support from Nordic forces and rebel Aeliids who opposed the Daedra-worshipping city-states. She wasn't leading in isolation, but building an alliance that upended the existing power structure, paving the way for the Alessian Empire. The covenant she forged with Akatosh rewired the relationship between mortals, gods, and Daedra. Planet-wide consequences. Zero exaggeration. The contrast with Miraak is sharp. He used dragon power for himself and ended up consumed by Hermaeus Mora. Alessia used her dragon blood for others and built a civilization that lasted centuries. She's not just a Dragonborn. She's the reason the Dragonborn exist as more than chaotic outliers in Tamriel's history. Alessia isn't a historical footnote. She's the cosmic gatekeeper whose legacy underpins the entire empire. Without her covenant and bloodline, none of the later emperors would have a claim to legitimacy, and the Daedra would have long ago run rampant across Nirn. But if you think Alessia's impact is big, just wait until you hear about the Dragonborn who followed her footsteps centuries later and built the second empire, Riemann Cyrodiil. Riemann Cyrodiil is the most important emperor nobody remembers. Ask any Elder Scrolls fan to name a Dragonborn emperor and they'll say Tiber Septim, maybe Martin. Nobody says Riemann. But this guy built the second empire, turned an invading army into his personal bodyguard service, and laid the groundwork for everything Tiber Septim gets credit for. Here's what happened. Near the end of the First Era, the Akaviri show up, specifically the Saishi, a race of serpent folk from across the ocean, and they launch a full-scale invasion of Tamriel, an alien army rolling through the continent with zero intention of stopping. Remen rallies the forces of Cyrodiil and meets them at the Battle of Pale Pass. He wins, decisively. But the Akaviri don't just surrender. They kneel. They swear allegiance allegiance to him on the spot because they sense something in his blood that matches their own Dragonborn traditions. These invaders crossed an ocean looking for a Dragonborn, and they found one standing on the other side of a battlefield. An entire foreign military shows up to conquer your homeland, you beat them, and instead of retreating, they go, actually, you're our boss now. That's not a military victory, that's a theological one. Remen didn't just defeat the Akaviri, he accidentally fulfilled their prophecy. These former invaders become the Dragon Guard, the elite protectors sworn to serve the Dragonborn. That's the direct precursor to the Blades. Every time you see Delphine being insufferable in Skyrim, that tradition traces back to snake people who got religiously humbled by one guy's blood. His Dragonborn status gets confirmed through two channels. The Akaviri recognition, which is cross-cultural validation from a civilization obsessed with dragons, and his connection to the Amulet of Kings, proving he carries the covenant blood of Alessia's line. The man had receipts from two independent sources. From there, Remen builds the framework of a pan-Tamrielic state, the infrastructure, the institutions, the political architecture that Tiber Septim would later inherit and complete. Remen did the hard part of proving the concept, and Tiber got the credit for finishing the job. His dynasty maintained control for generations, which is more than most Dragonborn can claim, but Remen himself assassinated. Somebody decided the God Emperor needed to go, and they made it happen. Not exactly a peaceful retirement. Here's what makes Remen genuinely fascinating. His dragon blood functions as mythic soft power. He doesn't shout people apart or absorb dragon souls. He transforms an existential military threat into the foundation of his government's enforcement arm. The Akaviri went from invaders to the backbone of imperial power. That's not a superpower in the traditional sense. That's political alchemy, and yet nobody talks about it. Tiber Septim conquered the continent and became a literal god, so he gets all the attention. But Remen proved that Dragonborn blood could do something even stranger than conquering. It could make your enemies worship you without a single word of the Thu'um. But if Remen built the blueprint for empire, the man who perfected it turned himself into something else entirely. Tiber Septim. Every Dragonborn before this guy was powerful. Some were world-changing. But Tiber Septim is the one who became a god. And not in the vague, mythological, people tell stories about him around campfires sense. He literally joined the divine pantheon. His face is on the coins, his name is in the prayers, and centuries after his death, entire wars are being fought over whether or not he counts as the ninth divine. Let me back up. Born in the late Second Era under a pile of different names, including Hjalti Earlybeard and Talos Stormcrown, this guy rose from essentially nothing to become the supreme warlord who unified nearly all of Tamriel under single banner. He founded the Septim dynasty, established the Third Empire, and did it all with combination of military genius, political ruthlessness, and one very large brass robot. His Dragonborn status isn't debatable. It's triple confirmed. The Greybeards summoned him to High Hrothgar and named him Ysmir, Dragon of the North. He wore the Amulet of Kings and lit the dragon fires, proving he carried the covenant blood of Alessia's line. And after death, he ascended to godhood as Talos, the ninth divine. That's three separate verification systems all agreeing. This man has a dragon soul. But here's where it gets complicated. During his conquests, Tiber deployed the Numidium, a colossal Dwemer brass golem that essentially breaks reality when you turn it on. Its activation caused massive temporal distortions, and likely contributed to the dragon break known as the Warp in the West, an event where time literally fractured into multiple contradictory timelines that all happened simultaneously. You know, normal conquest stuff, and then he died and became a god, which sounds straightforward until you realize that nobody can agree on how. The controversial Arcturian heresy proposes that Talos isn't one person at all. It's an oversoul, a fusion of multiple mortal identities, including Hjalti Earlybeard, the Underking, and possibly Zurin Arctus, his imperial battle mage. Three men, one divine entity. Other metaphysical treatises suggest he achieved Si-Che-Ayam, a state of enlightened self-awareness so rare and so bizarre that it essentially lets a mortal look at the fabric of the universe, realize none of it is real, and instead of ceasing to exist, just decide not to. And somehow that makes you a god. I don't know what to tell you. Elder Scrolls metaphysics are built different, but the truly fascinating part of Tiber Septim's legacy isn't what happened during his life. It's what happened centuries after his death. His Dragonborn identity became a theological battleground. The Thalmor ban on Talos worship under the White Gold Concordat isn't just religious persecution for the fun of it. It's a calculated attack on the foundational myth that legitimizes human empire. If Talos isn't a real god, then a Dragonborn ascending to divinity is a lie. And if that's a lie, then the entire justification for human dominion over Tamriel crumbles. Tiber Septim is the Dragonborn who became too big for history to contain, conqueror or liberator, one man or three, genuine god or political fabrication. The argument about what he was is the central conflict of the Fourth Era, and it's still not resolved. But if you think becoming a literal deity makes your bloodline untouchable, wait until you hear what happened to his last descendant sitting on the throne, Emperor Uriel Septim. The most Dragonborn on this list are warriors, conquerors, or prophesied heroes. Uriel Septim VII is a bureaucrat, an 87-year-old man sitting on a throne, signing documents, and quietly keeping hell from spilling into reality through the sheer fact of his bloodline. And honestly, that might be the most terrifying Dragonborn story of all. Here's the thing about Uriel. He ascends to the Ruby Throne in 3E368 and proceeds to rule for 65 years. That includes a decade where he wasn't even technically present because his battle mage Jagar Tharn imprisoned him in oblivion and impersonated him for 10 years during the Imperial Simulacrum. Nobody noticed. The entire empire was being run by a body double and the wheels just kept turning, which is, not ideal for the guy whose literal blood is the only thing maintaining a cosmic barrier against Daedric invasion, but Uriel survives that. He survives Daggerfall's political nightmare. He survives decades of conspiracies and assassination attempts. The man is the connective tissue of the entire Elder Scrolls series. Nearly every playable hero before Skyrim either directly serves him or is cleaning up a mess that happened on his watch. He's not the Emperor of Conquest. He's the Emperor of Heroes, quietly dispatching champions to fix problems while he maintains the Dragonfires and wears the Amulet of Kings like a man carrying a bomb he can never put down, and that's what makes his ending so devastating. By 3E433, the mythic Dawn has already killed every single one of his known sons. When we meet Uriel in the sewers beneath the Imperial City at the start of Oblivion, he's not running in panic. He knows exactly what's happening. The man has prophetic dreams. He's seen his own death. He tells you as much. Then he hands you the Amulet of Kings, tells you to find a man named Martin in Kvatch, and dies, stabbed by cultists in a sewer passage. 65 years of holding reality together ended by a dagger. What makes this hit so hard is the scale of what unravels. Uriel's death isn't just a political assassination, it's a structural failure in the universe's defense system. The Dragonfires go out, the barriers between Nirn and Oblivion collapse. Mehrunes Dagon starts pouring demons through gates across the entire continent. 3,000 years of Alessia's covenant, maintained by an unbroken chain of dragon-blooded emperors, snapped because one tired old man finally ran out of time and had no heir left standing. That's the real horror of Uriel Septim 7. He's not powerful. He can't shout. He can't absorb dragon souls. He can't conquer nations with the Thuum. He's just a man whose blood happens to be load-bearing architecture for the entire planet, and he carried that weight for 65 years, knowing that the moment he died without a successor, everything would break. Cool. Add that to the list of reasons the Septim Dynasty is fundamentally a terrible system for cosmic security. But if you think Uriel's death is where this story ends, you're wrong, because his last surviving son, a priest who didn't even know he was royalty, is about to become the most important person in Tamriel, and his story ends in a way that makes his father's assassination look peaceful by comparison. Martin Septim. Every other Dragonborn on this list either chose power, inherited it, or stole it. Martin Septim had it thrown at him like a grenade while he was minding his own business praying in a chapel. The man was a priest in Kvatch, completely unaware that his father was the Emperor of Tamriel. Then one afternoon, Daedra pour out of the sky, his city burns, and some random prisoner tells him he's the last heir to the Ruby Throne. Cool. Normal Tuesday. Martin is the illegitimate son of Uriel Septim 7, hidden at birth, raised with zero knowledge of his bloodline. No royal tutoring, no combat training, no preparation whatsoever. The mythic Dawn assassinated every known Septim heir in a coordinated strike, meaning Martin went from guy who reads scripture to literally the only person who can prevent reality from collapsing in about 48 hours. And he steps up, reluctantly, but he steps up. His Dragonborn status gets confirmed when he puts on the Amulet of Kings and it doesn't kill him. Only those carrying Alessia's dragon blood can wear it. The moment it sits around his neck without incinerating him, the question is settled. His plan is straightforward. Relight the Dragonfires at the Temple of the One, reseal the barrier between Nirn and Oblivion, save everything. But Mehrunes Dagon doesn't wait politely for the coronation. The Daedric Prince of Destruction physically manifests in the Imperial City, not an avatar. The actual prince, towering over buildings, tearing the city apart. And Martin makes a decision no other Dragonborn has ever made. He shatters the Amulet of Kings, destroys it completely, channels his dragon blood combined with the power of Akatosh to transform into a massive fiery dragon avatar. Then he fights a Daedric prince in the middle of the Imperial City and wins, banishes Mehrunes Dagon back to Oblivion and permanently seals the barrier. The cost is everything. After the battle, the dragon avatar turns to stone. Martin's body is gone, his soul presumably absorbed into Akatosh's manifestation. All that remains is an enormous petrified dragon statue in the Temple of the One. He's the only Dragonborn who literally, visibly, becomes a dragon. Not metaphorically, not in some abstract theological sense scholars argue about later. He transforms on screen, in front of witnesses, and never comes back. But here's what makes his sacrifice truly staggering. He didn't just end his life or his bloodline. He destroyed the entire system. The amulet shattered. The Dragonfires rendered unnecessary. Alessia's covenant superseded by whatever new arrangement his sacrifice created. After Martin, dragon blood can never again function as political technology. No future emperor can point to the amulet and say the gods chose my family. That framework is gone permanently. It's not a death, it's an extinction of event for a way of organizing reality. 3,000 years of institutional dragon blood, from Alessia through Raymond through Tiber through Uriel, all ending in one priest's decision to break the rules rather than play by them. Martin didn't maintain the covenant, he replaced it, and it cost him everything he was. Now, if Martin represents the emotional peak of the Imperial Dragonborn era, the most heroic sacrifice in the series, then we need to talk about someone who represents the exact opposite. Someone who wore the Amulet of Kings despite having absolutely no right to it. Mankar Cameron. Everything about the Dragonborn lineage is supposed to be clean. Akatosh blesses a bloodline. That bloodline rules. They wear the amulet. They light fires. End of story. It's a tidy system. And then this guy shows up and breaks absolutely everything. Mankar Cameron is the son of Cameron the Usurper, a Bosmeri king. His mother was a Bosmer woman named Kalis. So racially, politically, genealogically, he has zero business being anywhere near the Dragonborn lineage. He's not human. He's not Nedic. He's not part of Alessia's covenant in any way that makes sense on paper. And yet, when you finally track him down in Oblivion, standing in his personal paradise of Gaia Alada, he's wearing the Amulet of Kings, the one artifact that, according to every piece of Imperial doctrine ever written, can only be worn by those carrying the dragon blood. He's got it on like it's a fashion accessory. Nobody in the game explains this. Not a single character addresses it. It just happens, and you're supposed to deal with it. 3 theories exist, and none of them are comforting. Theory 1, Mankar actually has undocumented dragon blood through some obscure mixed ancestry nobody tracked. Theory 2, Mehrunes Dagon, through the Mysterium Xarxes, essentially hacked the rules of the Covenant, allowing Mankar to bypass the restriction. Theory 3, and this is the one that keeps lore scholars up at night. The doctrine that only dragon blood can wear the amulet was always more of a theological assertion than a hard metaphysical law, meaning the Empire built its entire legitimacy on a rule that might just be a suggestion. Every single one of those answers is destabilizing. Here's the thing about Mankar, though. He wasn't just some thief who stole a necklace. He was a true believer. His 4-volume Mythic Dawn commentaries lay out an entire alternative theology where the divines are false consciousness, where Mehrunes Dagon isn't a destroyer but a liberator freeing mortals from an oppressive reality. If he does carry dragon blood, then his commentaries become a rival gospel, a dragon-bloated figure rejecting the very covenant that's supposed to define what dragon blood means. He built the Mythic Dawn from the ground up, orchestrated the assassination of Uriel Septim VII and every known heir, stole the amulet, created an entire pocket dimension using the Mysterium Xarxes. The man was thorough, and his death is appropriately theatrical. You fight through Paradise, kill his children, and put him down in his own realm. The moment he dies, Paradise disintegrates around you and the amulet is recovered. His entire constructed reality was held together by him and whatever power he channeled. Pull the plug and it all goes dark, but the question remains. No primary text ever calls Mankar Dragonborn. No authoritative source explains the mechanism behind the amulet. He's just there, wearing it, being impossible, and nobody ever addresses it. He's either proof that dragon blood is stranger and less exclusive than the Empire wants you to believe, or proof that Daedric princes can rewrite divine covenants if they try hard enough. Both options mean the neat little system everyone relied on for 3,000 years had cracks in it the whole time, which is, not ideal for an empire that based its entire claim to power on that system being airtight. But if Mankar Cameron unsettles you, wait until you meet the person who made the whole concept of Dragonborn obsolete entirely. The last Dragonborn. The last Dragonborn isn't just another chapter in the saga of Dragonborn. They are the culmination, the final expression of a lineage that stretches back through myth, empire, and prophecy. When you first meet them, they're an unnamed prisoner doomed to die at Helgen. Then Alduin, the World Eater, crashes the execution, setting off the entire chain of events that define Skyrim. That's not just a cool intro moment. It's a sign this is the one destined to rewrite history. Shortly after escaping, the Dragonborn kills a dragon at the Western Watchtower by Whiterun in front of witnesses, absorbing its soul in that unforgettable instant. The Greybeards immediately recognize this, calling the Dragonborn to train in the Thuum, unlike earlier Dragonborn emperors who wielded dragon blood as a political tool more than a raw power. The last Dragonborn exhibits full mastery over dragon souls, shouts, and even bending the wills of dragons themselves. The prophecy attached to the last Dragonborn is epic in scope. Traveling back in time through an Elder Scroll to witness the ancient dragon war, the Dragonborn learns Dragonrend, the shout that forces even the mighty Alduin back down to human scale. Their final showdown happens in Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife, where the last Dragonborn fights alongside the spirits of ancient Nord heroes to finally put an end to the World Eater's threat. No previous Dragonborn has had a story climaxing in such a cosmic battle, yet the last Dragonborn is not just a savior, they are also a conqueror of legacies. In the Dragonborn DLC, they travel to Solstheim, confront Miraak, the original Dragonborn turned rogue, and defeat him in Hermaeus Mora's shadowy realm of Apocrypha. This victory marks the last Dragonborn as the sole active dragon-souled individual on Nirn, and it's packed with moral ambiguity given Hermaeus Mora's manipulative role. Their power power is untethered, wild, and entirely their own. On the political front, they can become an absurd juggernaut of influence. Leader of the Dark Brotherhood, Thieves Guild, Companions, and College of Winterhold, Thane of multiple holds, and a key player in Skyrim's civil war. No other Dragonborn amassed this level of concentrated power. The title, Last, is no accident. It signals an ending. After them, the era of Dragonborn linked to Empire and Covenant fades away. There will be no next Dragonborn carrying the mantle. That lastness carries huge implications for Tamriel's metaphysics. The dragon-souled champions empowered by Akatosh to fix cosmic imbalances may finally be a closed chapter. Unlike the Imperial Dragonborn of old, who embodied a covenantal destiny, the last Dragonborn emerges outside any bloodline or religious ritual. Dragon blood has shed its old skin as political technology and become something unpredictable, individual, and untamable. Their ultimate fate remains a deliberate mystery. No canonical tale tells us what happens once Alduin falls and Miraak is defeated. The last Dragonborn could ascend to godhood like Tiber Septim, fade into legend, or disappear into obscurity. The player's choices fill in the blanks, shaping the legacy or closure of the Dragonborn mythos. So this is where the entire Dragonborn saga comes to its peak, and then breaks apart. The last Dragonborn carries echoes of every predecessor. Miraak's dangerous power, Alessia's covenantal importance, Tiber Septim's godlike glory, Martin Septim's sacrificial heroism. But there's no dynasty behind them, no institution, no promise of a continued line, just one individual standing at the end of an impossible legacy. They are the last Dragonborn, the final, unfettered, and uncertain chapter in a history of dragon-blooded champions rewriting fate itself. After them, the dragons are dealt with, the old covenant shattered, and the story hangs on a question mark. What now, when there is no next? The Dragonborn is supposed to be Tamriel's ultimate trump card, immortal, blessed by Akatosh himself, born to rule, born to save the world. But across thousands of years of Elder Scrolls history, that blessing has destroyed nearly every single person who carried it. From emperors who reigned for days, to ancient priests who sold their souls to Daedric princes. Today we're breaking down every Dragonborn who failed, fell, or was erased from history entirely, and we're starting with the one who won by losing everything. Martin Septim. Martin Septim is the most effective Dragonborn emperor in the history of Tamriel, and his reward for saving the world was becoming a statue that somebody probably smashed with a hammer 200 years later. Here's the thing, Martin wasn't supposed to be emperor. He wasn't even supposed to know he was a Septim. Born in 3E 389 as the illegitimate son of Uriel Septim VII, he spent his entire life as a priest of Akatosh in the chapel at Kvatch. No royal tutors, no throne room, no knowledge of his bloodline whatsoever, just a quiet man praying to a god who, as it turns out, had very specific plans for him. Then the mythic Dawn assassinated his father and all three of his half-brothers in a single night, and suddenly Martin went from obscure chapel priest nobody had ever heard of to the only living heir to the Ruby Throne. That's not a promotion. That's a death sentence with extra steps. And it gets worse. Before Martin could even process the fact that his entire family had been murdered by a Daedric cult, the city of Kvatch was invaded by oblivion itself. Gates literally tore open in the sky. Daedra poured through. The city burned. The chapel where Martin had spent his quiet, peaceful years was surrounded by hellfire. He survived, barely, because the player character happened to show up and carve a path through the chaos. Without that intervention, Martin Septim dies in Kvatch, and nobody ever knows the Septim bloodline had one last shot, but Martin does survive, and what follows is one of the most thankless hero arcs in Elder Scrolls history. He doesn't get to sit on the throne and rule. He doesn't get a coronation or a crown. He gets handed a checklist of apocalyptic errands. He needs the Amulet of Kings, which is currently in the hands of Mankar Cameron, the leader of the cult that killed his family. He needs the blood of a Daedric prince. He needs Daedric artifacts. He basically needs to assemble the most dangerous shopping list in Tamriel while Mehrunes Dagon is actively trying to break into the mortal plane and destroy everything. And Martin does all of it. He figures out the ritual, he pieces together the Mysterium Xarxes, he works through every impossible requirement. Then, when Mehrunes Dagon himself physically manifests in the Imperial City, a literal skyscraper-sized Daedric prince stomping through the streets, Martin shatters the Amulet of Kings, merges with the spirit of Akatosh, transforms into a giant flaming dragon avatar, and banishes Dagon back to oblivion. Cool, incredible, world saved, and then he turns to stone, permanently. The Septim bloodline ends right there, frozen in the Temple of the One as a dragon statue. Martin saved literally everything and paid for it with his existence. Not just his life, his entire being. No afterlife, no legacy beyond a chunk of rock in a temple. The dragonfires went out forever. The Amulet of Kings was destroyed, and the empire he never got to rule spent the next 2 centuries slowly falling apart without him. Martin Septim is proof that being Dragonborn isn't a gift, it's a transaction, and the price is always you, Alessia. Every single person on this list exists because of her. Every betrayal, every sacrifice, every corrupted soul and broken dynasty, all of it traces back to one woman kneeling in the dirt, begging a god for help. Alessia was a slave, a Nedic woman born into Ayleid captivity during the early First Era, forced to live under elven masters who worshipped Daedra and treated humans like livestock, and she did what nobody thought was possible. She organized the first recorded human rebellion on Tamriel, rallied escaped slaves and Nordic warriors to her cause, and systematically dismantled the Ayleid city-states until she stood in the White Gold Tower as the first Empress of Men. Around 1E243, the First Empire of Cyrodiil was born. But here's where it gets complicated. Alessia didn't just win a war, she struck a deal. The Alessian Covenant was a pact directly with Akatosh, the dragon god of time. Akatosh took a drop of his own blood, mingled it with hers, and handed her the Amulet of Kings. The terms were simple on paper. As long as her heirs sat on the ruby throne and kept the dragon fires lit, the barriers between Mundus and Oblivion would hold. Daedric princes couldn't physically invade. Humanity was safe. Sounds like a victory, right? It was, for everyone except Alessia, because the fine print on that covenant was brutal. She didn't just pledge her life, she pledged her soul, she pledged her bloodline, she pledged every future emperor who would ever carry her dragon blood. And when she died around 1E266, barely 2 decades into her reign, her soul didn't pass on. It was locked into the covenant itself, held in metaphysical escrow, unable to rest until the pact was fulfilled or dissolved. That dissolution didn't come for thousands of years. Not until Martin Septim shattered the Amulet of Kings at the end of the Third Era did Alessia's soul finally get released. Thousands of years. She also built the religion that would dominate Tamriel for eras. The Eight Divines wasn't some pure spiritual revelation. It was a political compromise. Alessia deliberately fused Nordic worship traditions with Ayleid et Ada beliefs to pacify her conquered subjects and hold her fragile empire together. A theological rebrand designed to keep the peace, which, worked. But it also buried whatever her people actually believed under layers of diplomatic theology that nobody would ever untangle. And that's the thing about Alessia. Her failure wasn't a failure at all. It was her success metastasizing. She freed her people but imprisoned her own soul. She created a covenant that protected the world but chained every Dragonborn emperor after her to a burden they didn't choose. Every name on this list, every tragedy we're going to cover, is someone paying interest on a debt Alessia signed in the First Era. She is the architect of the Dragonborn curse, and she bore its cost longer than anyone. But if you think the weight of that covenant crushed Alessia, wait until you see what it did to the last emperor who tried to carry it. Uriel Septim. 7. Most Dragonborn on this list go out fighting, screaming, or clawing at some impossible destiny. Uriel Septim VII walked into his death like he was keeping a dinner reservation. This man ruled Tamriel for 65 years. 65. That's longer than most people in the Wasteland survive. Period. He navigated assassination plots, political betrayals, regional wars, and an entire decade where he wasn't even on his own throne. For 10 straight years, Uriel was imprisoned in a pocket dimension of Oblivion while his imperial battle mage, Jaeger Tharn, wore his face and ran the empire into the ground. 10 years of watching someone else destroy everything you built. And when he finally gets rescued, he doesn't crumble, he doesn't abdicate, he just gets back to work. And none of it mattered. He survived everything the world threw at him, every scheme, every war, every betrayal. And in the end, the Mythic Dawn just waited him out. Mehrunes Dagon's cult didn't need to outfight him. They just needed him standing in a sewer at the wrong moment. His sons, Geldal, Enman, Ebel, all assassinated the same night. His entire bloodline erased in a single coordinated strike. Decades of careful dynasty management gone before breakfast. But here's where Uriel becomes something more than just another dead emperor. He knew, not suspected, not feared, knew. The man had prophetic dreams for years telling him exactly how this ended. He saw his own death. He saw his sons' deaths. He understood that the Dragonborn bloodline wasn't a reward from Akatosh, but a very long fuse attached to a very large bomb. And his response to all of this foreknowledge was to calmly walk through the Imperial City sewers, find a random prisoner he'd seen in his dreams, hand them the Amulet of Kings, and say, essentially, here, you're going to need this. I won't. Then he turned around and let the Mythic Dawn kill him. No fighting, no dramatic last stand. The most powerful man on the continent accepted a knife in the dark like it was a scheduled appointment. His only act of agency in that final moment was making sure the amulet reached the right hands before his blood hit the floor. Dying gracefully and passing along jewelry, that was his contribution to saving the world. The cruel irony is that Uriel's entire life was preparation for a sacrifice he wouldn't even get to make himself. Martin, his illegitimate son he barely acknowledged, would be the one to shatter the amulet and become the avatar of Akatosh. Uriel just kept the seat warm. 65 years of keeping the seat warm so his secret bastard son could break the chair. His greatest act of kingship was dying on time. But if Uriel's story is about a Dragonborn who ran out of road, the next one is about a Dragonborn who built the road in the first place and still couldn't stop it from crumbling underneath him. Riemann Cyrodiil has one of the most absurd origin stories in all of Elder Scrolls, and that's saying something for a franchise where a cat race gets high on moon sugar and calls it theology. According to legend, his mother laid herself upon the earth at the top of Sancre Tor, and the land of Cyrodiil itself fathered a child. The continent, the actual dirt, that was his dad. So right out of the gate, Riemann is operating on a level of divine nonsense that even Alessia didn't couldn't reach. He's not just blessed by the gods, he's supposedly born from the soil of Tamriel like some kind of mythic potato with a destiny. And for a while, that destiny looks completely unstoppable. In 1E 2703, the Akaviri invade Tamriel. Thousands of Tsaeshi warrior serpents pour across the northern border, carving through everything in their path. Riemann rallies the fractured Colovian and Nibonese armies, meets the invaders at Pale Pass, and wins. But here's the part that really sells the Dragonborn legend. The Akaviri don't just lose, they kneel. They reportedly sense the dragon blood radiating off Riemann so powerfully that they drop their weapons and beg to serve him. These are hardened invaders who crossed an ocean to conquer a continent, and they take one look at this guy and decide, actually, we work for you now. Riemann founds the Second Empire. He formalizes the Imperial Legions, initiates campaigns into Morrowind, and transforms the Akaviri Dragon Guard into an elite military force loyal to the throne. A Dragonborn emperor with divine origins, battlefield dominance, and an empire stretching across most of Tamriel. And then the Morag Tong stabs him to death. Not a dragon, not a Daedric prince, assassins. Hired by the Akaviri potentate Versidue Shay, one of the very people whose ancestors knelt before Raymond's divine power and swore eternal loyalty. The entire Raymond bloodline is wiped out, and the empire he built is handed over to the same foreign administrators he absorbed into his court. The guys who bowed to his dragon blood just waited a few generations and then paid someone to remove it from circulation. Here's the thing about Raymond. His failure isn't dramatic, it's bureaucratic. He built an empire structurally dependent on vassals who had zero long-term loyalty to his bloodline. The Akaviri potentates didn't need to match his power or challenge his divine mandate. They just needed to outlast his usefulness and hire the right people, which is, not ideal when your entire claim to the throne is that the continent personally fathered you. Remen is proof that being Dragonborn doesn't come with institutional protection. You can be born from the literal earth, make an army of foreign invaders fall to their knees with the sheer force of your blood, and still get killed by a contract killer because your imported court advisors decided the paperwork would be easier without you. The Dirt's kid, taken out by middle management. But if Raymond's story is a cautionary tale about misplaced trust, the next one is about what happens when Dragonborn ambition curdles into something far, far worse. Patima the Wolf Queen. Up until now, every failed Dragonborn we've covered has been, on some level, a victim. Patima Septim is not a victim. Patima Septim is the reason other people become victims. Born in 3E67 as a Septim princess, Patima was arguably the most brilliant political mind of her era. She married into the Throne of Solitude, sank roots in Skyrim, and spent decades building a web of alliances, blackmail, and military power across 3 provinces. She was playing 4D chess, while everyone else was learning checkers, and she poured every ounce of that intelligence into one goal, putting her son Uriel III on the imperial throne with herself as the real power behind it. This is the War of the Red Diamond. Patima challenged Empress Kintira II's legitimacy, declared her son the true heir, and launched a civil war that tore the empire apart starting in 3E120. Her argument was simple. Her blood was Septim blood. The dragon lineage ran through her, and she would prove it by force if nobody would acknowledge it by right. Here's where it gets complicated. Whether Patima actually carried a genuine Dragonborn soul is disputed. She was a Septim by birth, sure, but the metaphysical dragon soul, the thing that separates a Dragonborn emperor from a guy in a fancy chair, that's never confirmed. It didn't matter. She believed it, commanded loyalty on that basis, and built her entire identity around the idea that dragon blood entitled her family to rule. For a while, it worked. Her forces won battles. Her son sat on the ruby throne. The empire bent. Then it broke the other way. Uriel III was killed, and Patima's war collapsed. Did she surrender, negotiate, accept defeat like a reasonable person? No. She retreated to Solitude and held out under siege for years. The entire imperial military bearing down on one city, and she refused to give an inch. She died in 3E137, alone, surrounded by corpses and necromantic horrors, still insisting she was right, which is, not ideal. But here's the kicker. Dying didn't stop her. Patima's spirit persisted for centuries. By the time of Skyrim's events, nearly 500 years later, a cult of necromancers is actively trying to resurrect her beneath Solitude. Half a millennium of being dead, and she's still causing problems. The Dragonborn has to physically destroy her ghost to keep her from clawing back into the world. She wasn't just after power. She still believed the dragon blood entitled her to a second chance. The universe said no. She said, I don't care. That's what makes Patima the pivot point on this list. Every entry before her involves someone who failed despite good intentions or impossible circumstances. Patima had everything. The bloodline, the intelligence, the political skill, the military capacity. Instead of greatness, she chose vendetta. She directed every gift toward personal ambition, not toward the Covenant, not toward Tamriel, just toward proving she was owed a crown. She represents the corruption of the Dragonborn ideal through pure ego. The dragon blood, real or imagined, became nothing more than a justification for war, necromancy, and a refusal to let go that literally outlasted her own body. But if you think a dead woman who won't stay dead is bad, wait until you meet the man who stole an emperor's face and wore it for a decade, Jagar Tharn. Every other entry on this list is someone who had the dragon blood and wasted it, corrupted it, or lost it. Jaeger Tharn never had it in the first place. He just put on the costume and nobody noticed for 10 years. Here's what happened. Tharn was the Imperial Battle Mage, personal advisor to Emperor Uriel Septim VII, top of the food chain, magically speaking. And around 3E389, he decided that advising the most powerful man in Tamriel wasn't enough. He wanted to be the most powerful man in Tamriel, so he acquired the Staff of Chaos, used it to open a pocket dimension of oblivion, shoved the real Emperor inside, and then used illusion magic to physically transform into Uriel Septim VII. Same face, same voice, same throne, and it worked. For 10 years, Jaeger Tharn sat on the ruby throne wearing the face of a Dragonborn Emperor, and the entire continent just went along with it. The Elder Council didn't catch on, the Blades didn't catch on. The provinces kept sending their taxes to a man who was, functionally, a warlock in a skin suit. He dismissed anyone who got too close, replaced key officials with Daedric minions disguised as mortals, and let the Empire rot from the inside out. Provincial wars went unresolved, systems degraded. The whole thing slowly rusted while Tharn collected power and made backroom deals with Mehrunes Dagon. But here's the thing that makes Tharn more than just a villain. His success is an indictment of the entire Dragonborn system. The Alessian Covenant, the Amulet of Kings, the Dragonfires. All of it was supposed to guarantee that only a true Dragonborn could rule, that the gods themselves would ensure legitimacy. And yet one ambitious battle mage with decent illusion magic fooled everyone for a decade. No divine intervention, no Akatosh smiting the imposter, no amulet rejecting him, just silence from the heavens, while a fraud ran the empire into the ground. If nobody can tell the difference between a real Dragonborn emperor and a fake one for 10 years, how much of the divine mandate was ever real? Tharn didn't break the covenant. He exposed that it might have always been more fragile than anyone wanted to admit. He was eventually destroyed by the Eternal Champion, who reassembled the Staff of Chaos and used it against him in 3E399, freeing Uriel from oblivion and ending the simulacrum. But the damage was done. A decade of institutional rot and provincial neglect had weakened the empire so badly that it never fully recovered. The instability Tharn introduced directly contributed to the conditions that made the Oblivion Crisis possible a generation later. Tharn wasn't a corrupted Dragonborn. He was a con artist who recognized that Dragonborn legitimacy was the most valuable political asset in Tamriel, and he simply stole it. Treated the Sacred Covenant like a disguise he could put on and take off. And the scariest part isn't that he tried, it's that it worked for as long as it did. But if Tharn was a parasite feeding on the Dragonborn legacy, the next entry is something far worse. Someone who actually had the dragon blood, received the gift directly from Akatosh, and used it to betray everything the Dragonborn were supposed to stand for. Mira. Every Dragonborn we've talked about so far inherited a legacy. They were born into dynasties, handed amulets, told what to do with their gift. Miraak didn't inherit anything. He was the first, the original, and he used every ounce of that divine power to serve exactly one person, himself. Here's the thing about Miraak. He starts out as a dragon priest during the Merethic era, back when dragons literally ruled over mortals, and the cult existed to keep humans obedient. He's a servant, a glorified middle manager for flying gods. But then something happens that changes everything. He discovers he can absorb dragon souls, not learn about them, not study them, devour them. He becomes the first mortal in history to demonstrate that a Dragonborn could rip the essence out of a dragon and make it his own. And instead of using that revelation to liberate mankind from dragon tyranny, which would have been the noble play, he looks at this world-shattering ability and thinks, cool, how do I use this to be in charge instead? His rebellion against the dragons isn't a freedom fight, it's a hostile takeover. He kills and enslaves several of his former masters, not because they were oppressing humanity, but because they were above him on the org chart. The theological foundation of an entire civilization shattered, not for justice, but for ego, which is, not ideal. But here's where it gets dark. Miraak realizes the remaining dragons are going to destroy him for his betrayal, so he does what any rational, power-hungry maniac would do. He makes a deal with Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric prince of forbidden knowledge, the tentacle-covered embodiment of be careful what you wish for. Mora pulls him into Apocrypha, his infinite library realm of writhing pages and eldritch nightmares, right before the dragons can finish him off. And there Miraak stays, for thousands of years. Let that sink in. Thousands of years trapped in a dimension made of eyeballs and tentacles. Serving a Daedric prince he was absolutely convinced he could outsmart, his consciousness slowly fragmenting across eons of forced servitude to a being whose entire domain is designed to make you feel like you're learning everything while controlling nothing. Miraak walks into Apocrypha thinking he's using Mora. Mora lets him think that, for millennia. When the Dragonborn DLC rolls around, Miraak finally makes his move. He uses black books, and the Bend will shout to mentally enslave the people of Solstheim, forcing them to build monuments in his honor while he prepares to break free from Apocrypha entirely. He's not subtle about it either. He's stealing dragon souls from kills you make, showing up uninvited to flex on you, and generally acting like a man who's been stewing in resentment for 4,000 years, because he has been. But here's the kicker. In the final confrontation, when you fight Miraak in Apocrypha and bring him to his knees, he doesn't get a warrior's warrior's death. Hermaeus Mora manifests, impales him with tentacles, and casually announces that Mirac has outlived his usefulness. The Daedric prince he sold his soul to just throws him away. The second, Mankar Cameron. Every single person we've talked about so far had one thing in common. They were Dragonborn. Some wasted it, some twisted it, some got crushed by it, but they had it. Mankar Cameron? Nobody's even sure he qualified. He claimed descent from the Cameron dynasty of Valenwood, which, sure, that's a real bloodline, but calling yourself Dragonborn because of it is like claiming you're royalty because your last name is king. Most scholars treated the claim with open contempt, but Mankar didn't care what scholars thought because he wasn't building a political argument. He was building a religion. He wrote the commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxes, 4 volumes of dense, hallucinatory philosophy that basically said everything you know about Tamriel is a lie. The Aedra aren't benevolent gods, they're prison wardens. The Dragonborn covenant isn't a gift, it's a chain, and the world itself isn't a creation. It's a stolen Daedric realm that Mehrunes Dagon has every right to reclaim. The Mythic Dawn weren't terrorists, they were liberators, and he didn't just write about it. He acted on every word. He founded the Mythic Dawn cult, assassinated Emperor Uriel Septim VII and all 3 of his sons, stole the Amulet of Kings, and kicked off the Oblivion Crisis. Gates to Oblivion tore open across Cyrodiil. Daedric armies poured through, cities burned, and Mankar watched it all from paradise, a personal realm of oblivion he'd created using the amulet itself. That last part still keeps lore communities arguing. The Amulet of Kings is supposed to reject anyone who isn't Dragonborn. It won't sit on the neck of a pretender. And yet, Mankar wore it comfortably, while using its power to sustain an entire pocket dimension of oblivion. So either the lore is wrong, the amulet has an undocumented loophole, or Mankar Cameron actually had dragon blood and chose to use it for the single worst possible purpose in history. He turned the most sacred object in the Dragonborn tradition into the battery for a Daedric pleasure prison. That's not just theft. That's a statement, but his entire theological revolution collapsed the moment the champion of Cyrodiil showed up. They walked into paradise, killed him, and took the amulet back. Paradise fell the instant Mankar died, and then Martin Septim, a man who'd spent his whole life as an anonymous priest, shattered the amulet, merged with Akatosh, and drove Mehrunes Dagon back into oblivion with his bare hands. Mankar stole everything to rule a world he'd decided was a lie. Martin gave everything to save a world he'd barely known. One is remembered as a saint, the other is a cautionary tale about building an entire cosmology around your own ambition. And honestly, whether Mankar was actually Dragonborn doesn't even matter. The gates were real. The dead were real. He came closer to ending Tamriel than almost anyone in history, and he did it while possibly having zero legitimate claim to the power he wielded, which is either the most terrifying part of his story or the most pathetic. I genuinely can't decide. Dragon priests are Skyrim's ancient nightmare fuel, servants of the dragons who were so devoted to their masters that they refused to stay dead. They clawed their way back as some of the most powerful undead enemies in the entire game. Today I'm ranking every single one from least to most powerful, and explaining exactly what makes each of them terrifying, starting at the bottom with a priest who had the most elaborate plan to cheat death and still ended up last, Hevnorak. Hevnorak is the most over-prepared failure in Elder Scrolls history, and I can prove it. Before he died, this guy literally drained all the blood from his own body as part of a calculated ritual to resurrect himself as a lich. Not a panic move, not a last resort, a premeditated step-by-step plan to achieve immortality. In life, he built an entire army through mind control, torturing his followers into total submission until they had zero free will left. You can still find the torture devices scattered throughout Valthum as evidence of what he did to people. Here's where it gets really interesting. An ancient warrior named Valdar considered Hevnorak so dangerous that he voluntarily imprisoned his own soul inside Valthum just to keep Hevnorak too weak to fully come back. Think about that. A man chose eternal death just to babysit this guy's corpse. But here's the kicker. After all of that, the blood ritual, the mind control army, the warrior who sacrificed everything to contain him, Hevnorak wakes up and fights you with basic shock magic, chain lightning, a storm Atronak, and his own unique lightning staff, roughly 545 magicka and 1,490 health at a fixed level 50. That's it. Every bit of his terrifying mind control ability, gone. Completely absent from his combat toolkit. The most calculated path to immortality in all of Skyrim, and he ends up at the bottom of the list. But at least Hevnorak had a plan. The next priest on our list couldn't even manage that, Vokun. Vokun might be the most forgettable dragon priest in the entire game, and honestly, that's kind of impressive when you think about it. In a lineup of ancient undead sorcerers who ruled over civilizations, commanded dragons, and terrorized entire regions, Vokun is just there. His name means shadow in the dragon language, which is almost too perfect. The guy literally fades into the background. He guards Highgate Ruins in the Pale, sitting next to one of Skyrim's least visited word walls. Even the game seems to have forgotten about him. There's no major quest tied to his encounter, no dramatic backstory waiting in journals scattered across his tomb, no personality to speak of. You walk in, you fight him, you leave. That's it. And here's the thing, his stats are completely standard. 1,490 health, 545 magicka, fixed level 50. Nothing that separates him from half the other priests on this list. He hits you with the same destruction spells you've seen a dozen times before. Zero surprises, zero memorable moments. He is the definition of just another boss. But here's where it gets interesting. His mask is actually one of the more useful ones in the game for certain builds. It gives you a 20% cost reduction to Conjuration, Alteration, and Illusion, which is a utility caster's dream. And because it's classified as heavy armor despite being entirely magic-focused, it's perfect for arcane warrior builds that want spell efficiency without sacrificing armor rating. So the irony of Vokun is this: the priest himself left almost no historical record, no documented deeds, no legacy worth mentioning, but the mask he drops, genuinely solid. The most anonymous dragon priest in Skyrim carries one of the better rewards, but if you think Vokun is unremarkable, at least he didn't drive his own followers to mass suicide. That honor belongs to someone far worse: Ragat. Ragat's followers killed themselves to get away from him. Let that sink in for a second. This wasn't an enemy army storming the gates. His own cult members, people who had willingly devoted their lives to serving the dragons, chose mass suicide over spending another day under this man's leadership. And they didn't just do it to escape the torture. They did it to prevent Ragat from capturing their souls after death. That's how terrified they were. Even dying wasn't far enough away from him. Forelhost, the ruin where you find Ragat, is essentially a crime scene frozen in time. Notes and journals scattered throughout the dungeon document exactly what happened there. The psychological manipulation, the physical torture, the slow, deliberate breaking of every person under his command. You're walking through a place where an entire chapter of the dragon cult was systematically destroyed from the inside by the very priests they served. It's one of the most genuinely disturbing pieces of environmental storytelling in the entire game, and most players just sprint through it looking for loot. In combat, Ragat fights with fire-based destruction magic. Wall of fire, lingering flame attacks, the works. His baseline stats match the previous two priests we've covered, but fire's lingering damage makes him slightly more punishing than shock or frost equivalents. You take the hit, and then you keep taking damage for seconds afterward. It adds up fast if you're not paying attention. His mask adds 70 points of stamina, which is interesting. That's not a caster's reward. That's a warrior's bonus, hinting that Ragat was a warrior priest in life, someone who combined physical brutality with magical dominance. It fits perfectly with the image of a leader who ruled through direct, personal violence rather than distant magical manipulation. But here's the familiar irony: a priest so feared that hundreds of people chose death over his company? In Undeath, he's a moderate difficulty fight that any prepared player clears without much trouble. The man who made an entire cult commit suicide to escape him gets taken down by a Dragonborn with a couple of fire resistance potions. But if you think Ragat's backstory is dark, wait until you meet a ruler whose madness destroyed an entire city that once loved him. Otar the Mad. Every dragon priest we've covered so far has been pretty straightforward evil. Power-hungry tyrants, sadistic cult leaders, the usual. But Otar? Otar is different. And honestly, his story hits harder than any of them. Here's the thing. Otar the Mad wasn't always mad. Historical accounts describe him as a genuinely beloved Nordic chieftain who ruled the city of Ragnvald with wisdom and justice. His people actually liked him, not feared him, not obeyed him out of terror. They respected him. He was, by all accounts, a good leader. And then something broke him. Nobody knows exactly what it was. Maybe Daedric influence crept into his mind. Maybe he dabbled in dark arts that slowly consumed him. Maybe it was just the crushing, corrupting weight of absolute power grinding down a good man over decades. Whatever the cause, Otar's mind shattered, and the wise chieftain became a violent, unpredictable despot. The transformation was so complete, they literally added the mad to his name. But here's the part that makes this story genuinely tragic. It wasn't some outside hero who stopped him. It wasn't the Dragonborn or a legendary warrior. His own people rose against him. Two of his own warriors overthrew and imprisoned him. The man they once loved became the man they had to lock away. In combat, Otar fights with shock-based destruction magic. Chain lightning, command Daedra, ebony flesh, greater ward. He's moderately difficult, particularly punishing if you show up without shock resistance. Nothing game-breaking, but he'll make you work for it. His mask is where the irony gets almost poetic. It grants 30% resistance to fire, frost, and shock simultaneously. That's the most balanced defensive mask in the entire Dragon Priest lineup. A perfectly balanced mask for a man who was once perfectly balanced himself, before he lost everything that made him who he was. No quest ties Otar to the player. There's no NPC sending you to Ragnvald, no storyline pulling you toward his sarcophagus. He's just sitting there in the dark, waiting for someone to finally put him down. And that isolation feels painfully appropriate for a ruler whose own people turned their backs on him. But if Otar's story made you feel something, the next priest is going to test your patience in a completely different way. Croesus. Croesus is officially classified as a frost dragon priest. His mask is cold-based. His elemental designation says Frost, and then he shows up to the fight wielding the Staff of Fireballs. Let me explain why this matters. Most dragon priests commit to one element, and you can plan around it. Bring frost resistance for a frost priest, fire resistance for a fire priest. Simple, but Croesus throws that entire system out the window. His spell loadout is exactly what you'd expect. Icy Spear, Ice Storm, Frost Cloak, all frost destruction. But then he pulls out a staff that launches fireballs at you between casts. You show up prepared for ice damage and immediately eat a fireball to the face. The slow, creeping frost spells force you to dodge in one direction, while lingering burn damage from the staff punishes you for standing still. It's a nasty combination that no single elemental resistance can fully counter. But here's where it gets even more ridiculous. His frost spells and fire staff create a dual element nightmare that most players aren't ready for. You stack frost resistance and the fireballs shred you. You stack fire resistance and the icy spears cut right through. He's not a specialist, he's chaos. And somehow that makes him more dangerous than if he just picked one element and committed to it. Now add the real problem. Croesus is the only dragon priest in Skyrim guarded by a live dragon. Sheerpoint has both him and a leveled dragon sitting at the same location, meaning the second you engage one, you're fighting both. Every player who's stumbled onto Sheerpoint at level 15 knows exactly how that goes. You're trying to dodge dragon fire from the sky, while a floating skeleton wizard pelts you with frost and fire on the ground. It's a two-front nightmare that pushes Croesus well above where his individual stats would place him. And after all that, after surviving elemental chaos and a dragon simultaneously, your reward is a mask that gives 20% bonuses to lockpicking, archery, and alchemy. 0 combat bonuses. Not a single point of extra damage or resistance. You just fought one of the most unpredictable encounters in the game for a stealth utility mask. It's almost insulting, but at least Croesus only has one dragon backing him up. The next priest doesn't need backup at all. Volsung. Every dragon priest you fought up to this point has had a weakness, a specialty, a school of magic they lean on, which means a resistance you can stack to shut them down. Volsung doesn't play that game. Here's what makes him different. On paper, Volsung shares the same primary skill set as a handful of other priests: alteration, conjuration, destruction, restoration, but most priests lean heavily on one element or one strategy in actual combat. Volsung doesn't pick a lane. He's not a fire guy, he's not a frost guy, he's not a shock guy. He's all of them, and he will switch between elements whenever he wants, making him one of the most unpredictable fights on the mainland. That unpredictability is the problem. You stack fire resistance, he hits you with frost. You prepare for frost, he switches to shock. There is no single resistance setup that neutralizes Volsung because he will always have something else in his back pocket. Every other priest on this list has a counter you can reliably exploit. Volsung makes that approach a gamble every time, but it gets worse. He also packs command Daedra, meaning he can turn your own summoned allies against you mid-fight. And if you think you'll just out-magic him, good luck. Volsung has exceptionally high magical resistance compared to his peers, so trying to cast your way through this fight is a losing proposition. You can't out-resist him, and you can't out-spell him. He shares the same level 50 base stats as every mainland priest below him, but the way he cycles through his full toolkit means he fights like a mage, way above his weight class. Preparation actually matters here, because generic strategies fail, and then you beat him, and he drops a carry weight increase, 20% better merchant prices, and permanent water breathing. One of the most versatile magical threats on the mainland drops a mask for shopping and swimming. It's genuinely one of the most practical masks in the entire set for actual adventuring, but the irony of earning it from this fight is almost insulting. Oh, and you don't just walk up to Volsung either. Reaching him requires solving multiple riddles and navigating significant environmental puzzles throughout Volskiga. By the time you finally reach the summit, you've already worked for it. But if Volsung is the priest that punishes lazy preparation, the next one punishes you for showing up at all. Nakrien. Most dragon priests guard a ruin. Nakrien guards the doorway to the afterlife. And that distinction changes everything about how you should think about him. His name translates to vengeance in the dragon language, and he's stationed at Skuldafn, the final checkpoint before you enter Sovngarde, the Nordic realm of the honored dead. This isn't some random posting. Alduin, the World Eater himself, specifically trusted Nakrien to guard the single most important door in the entire main quest. You don't get that assignment by being average. Here's where it gets interesting. Nakrien is one of only 2 dragon priests in the entire game who doesn't rise from a sarcophagus. When you arrive at Skuldafn, he's already standing, already waiting, because he never stopped guarding. Every other priest wakes up when you disturb their tomb. Nakrien was never asleep. That small detail says more about his dedication to Alduin's cause than any stat sheet ever could. In combat, he masters all 3 destruction elements: fire, frost, and lightning. That's more comprehensive elemental coverage than most priests ranked below him, and just like Volsung, this multi-element approach means you can't just stack one resistance and call it a day. Fire resist won't save you from his lightning. Frost resist won't stop the flames. He forces you to actually fight him on his terms. He also speaks exclusively in the dragon language during combat, not Tamrielic. Even in Undeath, thousands of years later, he considers the common tongue beneath him. But here's the kicker. He wields a dragon priest staff that literally functions as the key to opening the Sovngarde portal. You have to kill him to proceed. No workarounds, no alternate routes. Well, technically, some players have discovered you can whirlwind sprint past him to reach the portal area, treating him as an obstacle rather than a mandatory fight. But doing that means forfeiting his mask, and since Skuldafn is completely inaccessible after you complete the quest, you'll never get another chance. He's one of the most permanently missable items in the entire game. Nakrien's power isn't just about his spells or his stats. It's about what he represents. He's the last thing standing between you and the World Eater's domain, and Alduin chose him for that job. But if Nakrien earned his rank by guarding a door, the next priest earned his by being so dangerous that an entire expedition had to sacrifice themselves just to keep him contained. Moroki. Moroke's name means glorious in the dragon language, and honestly, he earns it, because when the Archmage of the College of Winterhold, Savos Aran, first encountered this priest deep inside Labyrinthian, he couldn't beat him, not even close. Aran's solution was so desperate it borders on unforgivable. He sacrificed his own companions, the people who trusted him, to create a magical containment field powerful enough to keep Moroke trapped indefinitely. Let that sink in for a second. When you finally reach Moroke during the college quest line, he's still bound in place. 2 enthralled wizards stand frozen on either side of him, the last survivors of Aaron's original expedition. They've been locked there for years, sustaining the prison with their own life force, fully conscious but unable to move or speak. And here's where it gets dark. You have to kill them to free Moroke before you can even fight him. You're the one who ends their suffering, and you're the one who releases the thing they literally died to contain. That alone makes this one of the most emotionally heavy encounters in the entire game. But Moroke himself is no pushover once he's loose. He holds the Staff of Magnus, one of the most powerful artifacts in all of Tamriel, created by the god Magnus himself. The staff can absorb magical energy directly from enemies, draining their power while fueling his own. And if you make the mistake of initiating dialogue with him mid-encounter, he instantly drains your magicka completely. Doesn't matter what protective measures you have, talking to him is a trap. He knows it too. Moroke refers to the Tamrielic language as guttural, and refuses to speak anything but the dragon tongue. That tells you everything about how he views you. You're not a threat to him. You're beneath him. You're an insect that somehow wandered into his prison. His combat stats sit at level 50, matching other high-tier priests on paper. But the Staff of Magnus changes the equation entirely. The fact that Savos Aran, one of the most powerful living mages in Skyrim, couldn't defeat him and instead had to sacrifice multiple lives just to keep him contained, tells you his real power goes far beyond what the numbers suggest. But if Moroke's frost-free arsenal impressed you, wait until you meet a priest whose entire identity revolves around cold, dishonor, and the frozen wastes of Solstheim. Dukan, welcome to Solstheim, because everything you've fought up up to this point just became the tutorial. Dukan is the first of the Solstheim dragon priests, and the difficulty spike is immediate. Every single mainland priest caps at level 50. Dukan fixed at level 60. That means more health, more magicka, more stamina, more everything. This isn't a subtle increase. This is Bethesda telling you the training wheels are off. His name translates to dishonor in the dragon language, and here's the thing. Nobody knows what that actually refers to. Did Dukan do something dishonorable? Was something dishonorable done to him? The lore never clarifies. It's just this hanging, unresolved detail that makes him slightly more unsettling than a priest with a straightforward name like Bloodsword or Glorious. Dishonor implies a story. We just never get to hear it. But what we do get is his combat style, and it's brutal. Dukan is a frost specialist. His mask enhances ice spells by 25%, meaning every single frost attack he throws hits harder than it would from an equivalent unmasked mage. And frost magic in Skyrim isn't just about damage. It slows your movement speed and drains your stamina. If you're a melee player trying to close distance, congratulations, you're playing his game now. Every step toward him gets slower. Every swing costs more. Warriors find Dukan particularly punishing because his entire kit is designed to keep you at range while he chips away at your ability to fight back. And he doesn't fight alone. Dukan summons Seekers, those tentacled Daedric servants of Hermaeus Mora, to fight alongside him. So now you're dealing with frost magic slowing you to a crawl, stamina draining with every hit, and multiple enemies attacking from different angles inside a confined tomb space. White Ridge Barrow doesn't exactly give you room to maneuver. The reward for surviving all of this is the Black Book the Sallow Regent, which grants significant power bonuses that genuinely justify the difficulty spike. At least Bethesda had the decency to put something worthwhile behind this wall. The level 60 baseline, the frost debuffs, the summoned allies. Dukan is a clear step above anything on the mainland, and he's the easiest of the Solstheim priests. But if you think a frost specialist is bad, wait until you meet the priest who turns lightning into an art form, Zakrisos. Every dragon priest in Skyrim has a fixed power level. They wake up from their sarcophagus at the same strength whether you're level 10 or level 80. They're frozen in time, locked to whatever power they held when they died thousands of years ago. Zakrisos doesn't play by those rules. He's the only dragon priest in the entire game whose level actually scales with the player. At low levels, he sits at level 25. At high levels, he caps out at 60. That means he's specifically designed to always be a threat, no matter when you walk into Bloodskull Barrow. No other dragon priest works this way, not one. The only other scaled encounter even close to this is Mirak himself, and that's the final boss of an entire DLC. Here's where it gets interesting. Every other priest has a fixed historical baseline. Their power is a snapshot of who they were when they died. Zakrisos is different. His power is fundamentally tied to whoever is confronting him. He calibrates to the Dragonborn. That's either the developers being incredibly clever with encounter design, or it's a lore-rich detail about the nature of his power. Either way, it makes him feel less like a static obstacle and more like a rival. He grows to meet you. His name translates to Bloodsword, and his specialty is shock magic. At level 60, he has access to the highest tier electrical destruction spells in the game: Lightning Storm, Chain Lightning, and Thunderbolt. And here's the thing about shock damage that makes it uniquely dangerous. It drains magicka alongside health. Half of every hit is ripped straight from your magicka bar. Mages lose their ability to cast. Warriors relying on enchanted gear or healing spells get cut off from their safety net. He doesn't just hurt you, he cripples your resources. His mask reinforces this perfectly. It boosts shock spell damage by 25% while granting 50% shock resistance. Maximum electrical output with minimal vulnerability to his own element. He's not just using lightning, he's built around it. Like Dukan, Zakrisos summons Seekers during the fight, maintaining that Solstheim multi-enemy encounter format that makes these DLC priests consistently harder than their mainland counterparts. You're not just dodging lightning bolts, you're managing Daedric backup while your magicka bar evaporates. And veteran players don't get to coast through this fight on raw stats, because he's scaled up with you. That level 60 version hits harder, has more health, and casts faster than the version a level 25 player would face. Most dragon priests punish you for showing up too early. Zakrisos punishes you for showing up at all. But if Zakrisos adapts to power, the next priest on our list mastered it, and his story might be the most tragic on all of Solstheim: Azidal. Most dragon priests wear their masks as trophies. Azidal wears his as a weapon, and that distinction matters more than you'd think. Here's the deal. Azidal is a level 60 fire specialist sitting inside Kolbjorn Barrow on Solstheim, and his mask doesn't just sit on his face looking intimidating. It actively amplifies his fire spell damage by 25% while giving him 50% fire resistance. That means every fireball, every flame wall, every single fire spell he throws hits significantly harder than it should for a mage at his level. The mask isn't loot you collect after the fight. It's the reason the fight is so brutal in the first place. But here's where it gets complicated. Azidal doesn't just throw fire at you and call it a day. He can reanimate fallen enemies during the fight. So every Draugr you killed on your way through Kolbjorn Barrow, they can get back up and start swinging at you. The longer the fight drags on, the more bodies he has to work with. Most dragon priests are pure casters. Azidal weaponizes your own progress against you. And then there's the dungeon itself. Kolbjorn Barrow is tight. Narrow corridors, confined chambers, limited escape routes. Fire magic in an open field is dangerous. Fire magic in a stone hallway with nowhere to run is devastating. The architecture isn't working against Azidal. It's working for him. Every wall bounce, every lingering flame on the ground covers a higher percentage of your available space. This isn't accidental. The dungeon layout and his elemental specialization feel like an intentional pairing designed to punish you. Wood elves and lightly armored builds without fire resistance gear walk into this fight and notice immediately. The damage stacks fast. The room fills with reanimated enemies, and suddenly you're fighting a war on multiple fronts in a space barely big enough for one. He also guards the Black Book Filament and Filigree, one of Hermaeus Mora's gateways to forbidden knowledge. So the reward is significant, but earning it requires surviving the highest fire output of any dragon priest in the game inside a dungeon that amplifies every flame he throws. The combination of level 60 base power, multiplicative fire damage from his mask, reanimation capability, and a confined environment that turns his specialty into a death trap pushes Azidal firmly into the top 3. But if you think fire in a tight space is bad, wait until you meet the priest who was powerful enough to literally break Solstheim off the mainland, Valak, the jailer. Every other dragon priest on this list wanted something. Power, immortality, worship, revenge. Valak wanted nothing. He was given a job, and he did it for thousands of years. Without recognition, without a mask, without a single reason to keep going except the fact that nobody ever told him to stop. Here's the thing about Valak. He was a full member of the dragon cult, a legitimate dragon priest with all the authority that title carried. But his role evolved into something no other priest ever had to deal with. After defeating Miraak, the first Dragonborn, the dragons appointed Valak as ruler of Solstheim with one sacred oath: make sure Miraak never escapes his imprisonment. He governed the island, yes, but that vigilance was the real assignment, not hoarding forbidden knowledge, not scheming for resurrection, ruling, watching, waiting, guarding a threat that was never supposed to resurface. And the reason he got that job? Because he earned it in the most violent way possible. Legend holds that when Valak discovered Miraak's betrayal of the dragons, the two fought in combat so catastrophically destructive that Solstheim physically broke away from the mainland of Skyrim. The entire island, ripped from the coast like a piece of torn paper. The geographic isolation of Solstheim, the fact that it exists as a separate landmass at all, is allegedly a scar from their duel. Two priests fought so hard they literally reshaped the map. After that, the dragons looked at Valak and said, you rule here, you watch him, forever. And Valak said yes. He maintained his vigil across thousands of years of undeath. No mask, no reward beyond a frozen island to govern, just an eternal assignment that he kept fulfilling long after the civilization that gave him that assignment had ceased to exist. The dragons died. The dragon cult collapsed. Empires rose and fell. Valak stayed at his post. His combat abilities aren't extensively documented compared to other Solstheim priests. He doesn't have a signature elemental specialty or a devastating magical arsenal that players write guides about. His power comes from something else entirely. Sheer endurance, historical weight, the fact that he simply refused to leave. When the Dragonborn arrives on Solstheim and Miraak's escape becomes imminent, Valak fights you. Not because he wants to, not because he's protecting treasure or guarding forbidden knowledge. He fights you because Miraak might get out, and that's still his job, even at the end. After millennia of thankless service, he's still doing exactly what he was told to do. The absence of a mask reward when you defeat him feels appropriate. He isn't here to be looted. He's here because he never left. Every other dragon priest drops a mask because that mask defined them. Valak has no mask because nothing defined him except the man he was assigned to watch. His whole existence was shaped by one person, and that person is next, Miraak. Over 4,500 years old. That makes Miraak the oldest living human on Nirn. Not the oldest undead, not the oldest spirit, the oldest living human, preserved in a realm of infinite knowledge while civilizations rose and fell without him. And unlike every other dragon priest on this list, Miraak wasn't granted power by dragons. He was born with it, the original Dragonborn, capable of absorbing dragon souls as a birthright rather than a blessing. That distinction matters more than you think. See, Miraak served the dragons faithfully. He was their priest, their weapon, their loyal servant. Then he found a black book, and everything changed. Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric prince of forbidden knowledge, reached through that book and handed Miraak something no mortal had ever possessed. The Bend Will Shout, a dragon language incantation capable of fully dominating dragons themselves. The only mortal level power in existence that could threaten dragon supremacy. And Miraak didn't hesitate. He turned that shout against his masters and devoured 21 dragon souls before his rebellion was finally suppressed. He didn't just fight dragons, he consumed them. Here's where it gets complicated. During the Dragon War, when Hakon One-Eye, Gormleth Golden Hilt, and Feldir the Old came begging for his help against Alduin the World Eater, Miraak refused. The three greatest heroes of the age, desperate enough to ask the most dangerous man alive for assistance, and he turned them away. He launched his own rebellion instead. Lore suggests he may have actually had the power to defeat Alduin if he'd chosen to help. He just didn't care. The dragons couldn't execute him, or wouldn't. Instead, they imprisoned him in Apocrypha, Hermaeus Mora's realm of infinite forbidden knowledge. Think about that for a second. The punishment for a man whose downfall was seeking forbidden knowledge was being locked inside an infinite library of forbidden knowledge. Either the dragons had a cruel sense of irony, or Mora orchestrated the entire thing from the beginning. Valak the Jailer, the entire previous entry on this list, exists solely because of Miraak. One dragon priest's entire purpose across thousands of years was watching for this man's escape, and the fight itself, nothing in Skyrim compares. At the summit of Apocrypha requires you to kill Miraak 4 times. You beat him down, he turns ethereal, teleports to the center of the arena, uses Bend Will to steal a nearby dragon's soul, and fully restores his health. Then you do it again and again. No other dragon priest has a multi-death mechanic. No other enemy in the game forces you to watch them resurrect repeatedly while you burn through every resource you have. But here's the kicker. You don't actually beat him. After his 4th resurrection attempt, Hermaeus Mora himself intervenes, impaling Miraak and killing him mid-resurrection. The Daedric prince decided his servant had outlived his usefulness. That's the only reason the fight ends. Not because you were strong enough, because a god got tired of him. His unique robes, sword, staff, and mask all drop on that final death. And that mask is the only one in the entire game that reflects Hermaeus Mora's aesthetic, rather than the Nordic dragon cult style, because Miraak stopped being a dragon priest a long time ago. He became something else entirely. The most powerful dragon priest in Skyrim wasn't killed by the Dragonborn. He was betrayed by the same god he betrayed the dragons for, born with the power of a Dragonborn, corrupted by the knowledge of a Daedric prince, and ultimately discarded by both sides. That's Miraak, first Dragonborn, last dragon priest standing, and the only one on this list who needed a god to put him down. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the best quests in Skyrim explained, click the video on the screen now.